what I think is the most transformative area that I've been involved with in the last year or so has been around evaluation and planning for water efficiency in buildings. I've been working in the space of kind of sustainability and real estate portfolios for 11 years. And for the first 10 years, I was involved in exactly 0 water audits because that hasn't really been a thing that has happened much in the context of buildings, other than maybe like a fixture inventory for LEED or something like that. And in the last year, I've actually been involved with almost 10 water audits for different types of facilities, large, small, commercial real estate, corporate real estate, and so on. And I think there's a real sort of emergence of technology related to water efficiency and a real need to develop the processes for evaluating water use in buildings that mirrors what we already know how to do around energy efficiency in buildings. I thought I'd start by talking a little bit about water issues specific to Chicago. Thinking about water resources is always a really interesting way to get to know the history of a place, I find. Then we'll talk about some of the pressures that I think are driving this newfound attention around water issues, and then what we're kind of seeing in the audits that are happening. So first of all, some good news about water in Chicago. The Great Lakes are, of course, a wonderful, bountiful water resource, and they are protected by an international treaty from the early 1900s. So there's no way, without violating international law, that our water will be shipped somewhere else in the country. So we are like sitting really pretty compared to a lot of places. We also have a pretty fascinating kind of legacy around water use in the Great Lakes and how water has been managed in Chicago. This is a picture of the Back of the Yards neighborhood, the stockyards where a lot of the meat processing happened in Chicago. And this area was called Bubbly Creek, this waterway, because a lot of carcasses would end up in it and then start, decomposing in what having bubbly way. And this kind of industry work, as well as some other things, created this idea that the Chicago River would be better off flowing away from the river as opposed to into it, which is the natural watershed kind of strategy. And so we actually successfully re-engineered an entire watershed in the Chicago River to bring our gross, disgusting, rotting carcasses to St. Louis instead of into our water supply in Lake Michigan. It's very clever of us. And this is a massive kind of engineering feat, and it's been the case for over 100 years now that the river has been reversed in that way. And there's just in the last few years I've heard talk that it might be appropriate to re-engineer this and kind of establish the original flow patterns. That will be another engineering feat if we actually pull that off, and a political feat, I'm sure. We have, even though we've got the carcasses flowing in the preferred direction right now, we still have other problems related to water issues in the city. Like a lot of places with combined storm and sewage systems, it takes very little rainfall to overwhelm the capacity to treat stormwater, and so there'll be dumping events when that overage happens, where a lot of untreated sewage will be put into the lake and into the river, just because there isn't adequate capacity. So if you've ever flown over Chicago after like a big summer rainstorm, you might see a kind of brown plume stretching out into the lake, which is basically a bunch of untreated sewage, which is also why you get alerts to not go swimming after rainfall because of the high bacteria loads. But a lot has been happening that I think is really positive around the river and the waterways. So Mayor Emanuel has taken to calling the river Chicago's backyard if the lake is considered our front yard. And there's been a pretty significant amount of investment in improving the recreational opportunities around the river, not just downtown, but out on different north and south branch locations as well. This is one of the new boathouses that exists along the river, where in theory kayakers and canoers will come and flock to some sort of rental boathouse situation. There's also some on the north side near where I live. Also on the north side where I live is an area super prone to flooding. This is Albany Park, which kind of has seen, as a lot of places have seen, 100-year storms happening, just once or twice a year or every other year. And there's a huge cost associated with flood water damage in urban areas in particular, although in lots of places. And so some of what has been happening to ameliorate this situation is this giant stormwater diversion tunnel that's just finished. So this is an 18-foot diameter tunnel that runs a big distance from the North Channel, back upstream to part of the north branch of the river, so that when there's a lot of rainfall, we just jam a bunch of that water into this giant tunnel for a while until things have settled down in the river, and then can slowly release it. This project cost $70 million, and it was just recently completed. And I did notice the other day in Albany Park that there was still a flooded intersection, so I hope it's working out, but maybe not 100%. And so all of these big kind of infrastructure projects, even though we have abundant water, of course, because of the Great Lakes, we are not immune to issues with increased water-related costs in our buildings, because projects like this require a lot of financing. So I think that is one type of new pressure that's sort of driving this new kind of focus on water efficiency in buildings. This is the City of Chicago water rate schedule over time. It has gone up, more than 4 times what it was in the early 2000s. And that's kind of a combination of sneaky occasional increases on the water supply side, the sewage side. And then my brand new favorite sneaky thing is, I just noticed this on a utility bill a month ago, and I was like, what the? They've introduced a new sewer water tax assessment that's related to unfunded pension obligations that's tacked onto the water bills. So, it's, on the one hand, who wants a new tax? On the other hand, this does help to elevate water costs in buildings to an area where it garners more attention from facility operators and property managers to think seriously about what the efficiency opportunities are. The main reason nobody's focused on water in buildings is because it's so cheap compared to all other utility types. And often that cheapness is a sort of artificial price point in nature. So there's not a lot of market pressures previously that have been coalescing around water. There's also some regulatory forces that are rolling. I think most people are familiar with the energy benchmarking and disclosure ordinances. Sometimes those will come along with a criteria to do an energy efficiency audit and perhaps make some improvement. A lot of municipalities have been applying that same model to water. So this is an example from LA, but there's also similar ordinances in Atlanta and lots of other cities. And at some point could happen here in Chicago. And these ordinances are basically saying, report on your water consumption, also do a water audit. So I've had clients kind of contact me and they're like, do you know of any water audit protocols that exist? Or who does a water audit? So it's not as developed a kind of service offering, certainly as energy audits. And then another kind of, I don't think this is really a force just yet, but something that is kind of hanging out there over us is that insurance companies are absorbing all of this cost associated with increased severe storm events. And at some point, that's going to flow into how insurance premiums are thought about and how asset valuation and decision making around building sale transactions happen. And in fact, some of you may have seen this a few years ago, an insurance company filed some lawsuits against municipalities around Chicago for not taking more effective action around climate change, saying that this is a known problem, that there's going to be these extreme storm events, and you're not addressing it, and it's creating a lot of damage to physical assets that we have insured. So I haven't heard of any of these lawsuits like actually leading to a municipality having to fork over a lot of money to an insurance company, but it's certainly an interesting development. So that's on the sort of facility level. At the portfolio level, you have a few other kind of drivers that are taking shape. The two biggest ones that are relevant to my work is the CDP reporting framework. This started out as an effort to get Fortune 500 companies to do annual greenhouse gas inventories of their operations. And you ended up with these kind of activist shareholders and other stakeholders being able to kind of leverage these frameworks to get large companies to be more transparent and to be more proactive about managing efficiency and emissions. About 4 or 5 years ago, these frameworks started including water into their sort of purview. And so you now see a significant number of large companies actually tracking their overall water use and incorporating board-level governance procedures around water use into how they do their business. So that's on the sort of publicly traded company side of things. On the real estate side, GRESB is a particularly relevant driver. This is a tool to provide investor quality information to associated with different real estate investment trusts, so that the investors know exactly how well the assets within a portfolio are being managed. And so this has gotten a lot of portfolio managers being very deliberate about gathering information about building performance and working to improve it over time. How all of this sort of flows into corporate governance and financing has to do with the risk side. So you're also seeing these new tools that kind of give you a shortcut ability to screen the water-related risks associated with your facility. So Ecolab, in partnership with Microsoft and Trucost, just came out with this new water risk monetizer that tries to peg a financial dollar amount to water-related risks based on a facility's kind of physical location and the water issues that exist around it. There's a few tools and frameworks that kind of support this type of disclosure and evaluation. Aqueduct is one that is pretty prominent from the World Resources Institute. There's also something called the Water Risk Filter, and then an Alliance for Water Stewardship that is trying to define how companies and how real estate portfolios should be thinking about water management in the same way you would think about greenhouse gas management. And this is all kind of like pushing towards having better defined protocols and procedures that will help to sort of drive the deployment of new efficiency technology. So, 5 years ago, if you tried to Google water audit protocol, you would have come up with this resource from the EPA, which is actually for municipal utilities to audit themselves for gigantic leaks. Nothing actually existed at the facility level in terms of a standardized procedure and protocol for water audits. Now you have a few different things kind of happening to create that order and standardization. One is the BIT building framework, which I've been involved with helping to develop over the past few years, which requires a water audit for all participating buildings. The other is a model ordinance and protocol that NRDC has been developing in conjunction with some municipalities. So now you can actually order up something, you can have it solicit it as a service for evaluation for your building. So now I want to talk about some of the highlights and some of the things that I've been seeing with the water audits that I've been involved in. Most of these examples are going to be from a very large kind of hotel complex in Las Vegas, Nevada. And they kind of got interested in paying attention to water efficiency, not necessarily because they're in Las Vegas, but more so because they, at a corporate level, have a really sort of a significant commitment for water reduction along with energy and other things. So they've been doing these evaluations of all of their facilities to figure out how can we meet this 5% or 10% reduction goal that has been kind of mandated from the top. So they've been doing it for a while. They kind of thought they were on track and had a plan for what they were going to do. And then the utility replaced the meter that was serving the building. They have one utility meter and then a bunch of sub-meters that they control. Something dramatic happened when the utility meter was replaced. And their consumption, it turns out in reality, is about 2 or 3 times what they thought it was, because that meter had, gotten sluggish and was just like slowly turning. And so now they thought they did all of these like efficiency projects. They think they're on track to meet their target, and they realize like they're nowhere near their target, and their baseline was totally whack. So they started becoming more and more bullish on installing sub-metering so that they could have better visibility into what was happening with water use in the building and not be blindsided by this type of thing with the utility replacement. So they tried to sub-meter 100% of all of their major water end uses. So the red line here shows the utility meter, and the blue line is the sub-meter. And once they sub-metered everything they could think of, they were missing 120 million gallons of water. Where could that water be? Actually, surprisingly difficult to figure out. So their engineering team has been running around like looking for these lines that they don't know about. And they identified another 50 million gallons through that process. And they're left with about 70 million gallons that we still don't know where it is. I've got what I think is a really strong hypothesis about where it is, but we haven't been able to fully validate that yet. And so when you talk about like laser scanning, if there's a way to get a laser to just find the plumbing infrastructure, because it's really actually quite common to not know where the meters are and to not know where the major supply lines are on the plumbing side in existing buildings. So we're charged with both helping them find the 70 million gallons of missing water and also helping them to sort of figure out how to meet this 5% improvement goal. So they're looking at a lot of different options. They really feel limited by the available technologies, and I think this is an area where hopefully there are a few different hubs of innovation that are going to kick out more kind of market-ready solutions. There is some good stuff happening, like the next generation fixture efficiencies are really quite compelling. So one of them is this Nebbia luxury shower head, which allegedly is only 0.7 gallons per minute on the normal setting, and is also allegedly a very pleasing shower experience. The sort of next gen toilets similarly are very, very efficient. Operationally, there's usually like tons of low-hanging fruit related to water use. So in this case, there's probably 20 to 30 different kitchens throughout this facility. Some of them have dishwashing equipment that has minor components that have failed, which means the sluice straws just run continuously. So we found these 2 areas where about 5 gallons per minute is running like directly from a supply line into a drain 24/7. It cannot be turned off because of some kind of equipment failure. Other things like just kind of running taps continuously is really common in a restaurant setting, and working with kitchen staff to kind of put water conservation front of mind is a challenge, of course. Some of the other things they're looking at, I won't go into great detail, but using reverse osmosis to deal with nuisance water that comes in through the foundation so that they can then use it for some other purpose. Changing the kind of chemistry associated with the treatment in the cooling tower and the pools and spas can really reduce the bleed off rate. So they're exploring a lot of those innovations that are more on the kind of chemistry side of things. The other thing that they're doing is kind of or that we've doing as a part of this audit, is kind of a really detailed site-level water risk assessment to support their corporate-level reporting. So I mentioned that aqueduct tool. It will give you risk indicators in these high-level categories of, overall physical quality-related risk, quantity-related risk, and then regulatory and reputational-related risk. This is the score for this actual site in Las Vegas. And some of these indicators don't make sense based on what we know about that area. And the reason why is because the databases that drive the population of these risk factors are sometimes national in scale. So it's like overall in America, regulatory risk is at a low level. In Las Vegas, they're in the middle of a tri-state dispute about what's going to happen to the fate of the Colorado River. Like, there's a huge amount of regulatory risk associated with their operations, but it doesn't kind of show up in the current screening tools. So we sort of took a more sort of nuanced view of what is true for that location. The next thing, one of the last things I want to talk about in terms of a technology arena is leak detection technology. I think this is a really ripe area for there to be massive improvements around what's going on with water management in facilities. There's a lot of options for sort of relatively inexpensive clamp-on sensors so that you don't have to cut through the pipes. There are algorithms that can see, they know what a toilet flush looks like, and they know what a running toilet looks like, and they know what a shower looks like in terms of the data signature. And so they can do a lot of interesting automatic alerting when there is a signature of a leak as opposed to an expected use. There are interesting ability to have a wireless mesh network of sensors throughout your facility so that there's good data communication, even if it's not a place where a sort of cellular data network can normally reach within the core spaces of buildings. And then, we already heard a little bit about thermal imaging for water. I think a lot of people are familiar with this as a way to evaluate air leaks in buildings, but it's also a very nifty strategy for looking for water damage in buildings. And this is the kind of thing that happens in every building at some moment in time. There's a leak. There's a lot of physical damage that can happen around leaks. So I think predictive maintenance around water systems would be a really welcome addition to what's available to building managers. And then lastly, some of the sort of interesting organizations or frameworks out there driving innovation around water in buildings. I've mentioned some of these. A few that I didn't mention, the Water Start is a Vegas-based incubator for new water technologies. And then the Water Council does something similarly, but they're based in Milwaukee. So kind of neighbors who are in the city doing presentations and information quite regularly. So a good resource to check out if you want to do ambitious things around water in your buildings. All right, any questions? Yes?
Can you go back to the slide that shows the leak detection technology and tell us the names of those devices?
Sure. So this is, you can kind of see this is a Floyd kind of metering option. This one and that far one is called H2O degree. These are the ones that have the embedded kind of radio transmitters that create this kind of mesh network of transmitting the data from, supply line to supply line or toilet to toilet. You can actually install them at the point of an individual water using item, or they're being used in like multifamily for submetering so that there can be direct billing for consumption by unit. Yeah, if you have multifamily properties and you've been wrestling with how to address water costs and kind of occupants, this is a really good strategy. And they have a lot of case studies about projects where they've done that. Yes?
Did you verify the accuracy of the utility meter in Las Vegas?
Well, yeah. Well, part of the reason they have all the submeters is to verify that accuracy. And so everybody's kind of hoping like, well, maybe the utility meter is just wrong. But no, they actually are missing a bunch of their supply lines in their submetering schema. So we know that the utility data seems like it is more accurate than the submeter data at this point.
Chicago's coming up with water benchmarking next year. Have you had buildings ask for like, what is a water audit, I guess?
Yeah, right. So most of the protocols that have kind of emerged, that NRDC consortium and the one sort of embedded within BIT building framework, they kind of mirror the ASHRAE level 1 or level 2 procedure, but just applied to water using systems. And so water using systems in some ways are a lot more simplified within buildings than the energy using systems. And so it can be like a less intensive process than an energy audit. But at the same time, there's far less expertise and experience in evaluating water use in buildings and fewer technology options for retrofits and upgrades. So these pieces are kind of moving along, not exactly in concert, but there's definitely been a fair amount of progress.
And a follow-up question, so a vendor has reached out and has something called a smart valve that's placed where the water comes into the property because there's air within the water, so it's eliminating that air because we're paying for air as opposed to water. Have you had any feedback on something called a smart valve?
Interesting. No, I haven't heard of that. So do they get away with putting it upstream from the meter?
They put it right inside the building. Yeah.
They put it, so it's water supply meter. They put it on the front side. They put back pressure on it to theoretically reduce the air.
How much, like, is there a estimated percent of air bubble? 10 to 20%?
Yeah.
That's like an excavator filling their dump truck only halfway.
I actually had, the vendor did a property, a 450 unit property, where they had one water meter coming in, about a $19,000 cost, 9-month payback.
Interesting. I had not heard of that. And it's it seems more of a cost saving strategy than anything else. But if you compare it with some smart metering technology that gave you a really kind of clear visibility into your consumption, then you've got some good management tools available. Okay, Emily?
Where do you think the 70 million is?
Where do I think the 70 million is? Okay, it's in the expo hall. And the reason I know that it's in the expo hall is that they introduced an additional kitchen operation in the expo and started catering some significant events out of it. But you can't see that in the historic water data. There's no uptick, when the kitchen comes online. And also we were able to pair up some of the kind of event and attendee counts with what is happening on the submeter that allegedly serves the expo hall. And it just doesn't make sense. There are certain events where the kind of gallons per attendee is only 4 gallons. And this is, day-long events with a lot. That's just like not an appropriate benchmark for per attendee consumption. So I feel very confident that it's in the expo hall, and I am going to be vindicated at some point, and I will report back to all of you.
It's like real life clue. You did it.
Yes.
Well,
Okay, thank you.